Today's Thinking Thursday is going to be about one of my favorite philosophers. Not my favorite philosopher, I will tell you in this video who my favorite philosopher is, but one of my favorite philosophers and the dude who wrote my favorite paper of all time, which I'll talk a little bit about, but today I'm just going to focus on his biography, and then I'm going to give you an option to kind of decide what the part 2 for this video is going to be about, because I want to focus in on some of his work, but I'm going to let you decide which aspect of his work we can focus in on. So let's talk about him. So he was born on the 3rd of September in 1866 in Norfolk Square in London to cousins Francis Ellis and Caroline Ellis. And he was actually originally named John McTaggart Ellis, and he was named John McTaggart after his great uncle, the first Baronet, Sir John McTaggart, and had his dad's last name, Ellis. And then when his great uncle died, part of the inheritance agreement was that he would take on the last name of his great uncle. So he ended up being John McTaggart Ellis McTaggart. So when you look him up, he's actually J.M.E. McTaggart and was named McTaggart twice for the same Sir John McTaggart, which I find so funny. But anyway, that's why he's called John McTaggart Ellis McTaggart. But he was a philosopher, and he has some really, really interesting ideas. My favorite idea is the unreality of time, and my favorite paper is the unreality of time, which maybe I'll do a whole video on if that's what people want me to do. McTaggart's paper, The Unreality of Time, got really famous, and his other works were pretty successful too, but I want to focus on his biography because that's talked about less, and I think it's really useful to place these academics in context. So, his great-grandfather was Thomas Flower Ellis, who was a West Indies trader, but then he went into publishing, and he called himself a distributor of useful information, which I love as a phrase. But he created a publishing company with his son, Francis Ellis, who was McTaggart's dad. So Ellis and Ellis, the publishing company, was kind of the context of how McTaggart was being raised. So he was also familiar with writing and publishing and academic work. Thomas Flower Ellis was also part of the Royal Astronomical Society, which is pretty damn cool from an academic perspective. And Thomas Flower Ellis died at 15 Bedford Place, which is close to my heart because I used to hang around in the area, in the kind of Russell Square area of London. And Thomas Flower Ellis's wife, Susan McTaggart, was the daughter of Sir John McTaggart, the first Baronet, who McTaggart was named after. And that McTaggart, so great uncle McTaggart, was a Whig MP. So he was in Parliament as well as being a first Baronet. So he was in that kind of like ruling class, aristocratic, fancy people scene, which I think informed some of McTaggart's later conservatism. So we'll come back to that in a second. Let's talk about McTaggart when he was a wee one. So when he was a little boy, he was pretty outspoken. He was a very outspoken atheist, which actually got him expelled from school when he was going to a school in Weybridge. He was so convinced of atheism and talking out against the restrictions that came with the religiosity of his school that he got expelled. Later in his life, he actually was a supporter of the Church of England, but I think that might be due to the fact that this was kind of necessary for his job. So he went on to become quite academic, and his father had gone to Trinity College and his grandfather had gone to Trinity College. So he ended up going to Trinity College in Cambridge. And through academia, he then went on to become a college professor. And it was necessary as a college professor that you were a member of the Church of England. So he might have just been defending the Church of England to hold on to his job. However, something very interesting happens here. So John McTaggart Ellis McTaggart was taught by Henry Sidgwick, and Sidgwick actually renounced his membership of the Church of England, even though he was a professor in Cambridge. So it's necessary that he was a member of the church, but he renounced his membership of the church because he said that he couldn't be a member of the Church of England in good conscience. So he was kind of saying no, my moral views are stronger than my need to hold down this job. And Cambridge actually said, you know what? You're such a great professor. we're going to let you be an honorary professor, even though you've renounced your membership of the Church of England. So it seems like there could have been a way that John McTaggart, Ellis McTaggart, could have renounced his membership of the Church of England and stayed a professor. So even though he was an atheist and publishing works announcing why he's an atheist, he remained a member of the Church of England. And I'm going to give a speculative reason as to why. If you've been to Cambridge and you've got to see the chapels there, I would also be a member of the Church of England, spending my Sunday mornings listening to gorgeous music in an absolutely dynamite location sounds pretty freaking fabulous. I would also be a member of the Church of England if I got to do that every Sunday morning. Like, imagine having a free concert on a Sunday morning in an absolutely gorgeous location. Yeah, sign me up. I'll be an atheist member of the Church of England. It's beautiful. So that may have been a reason why he was like defending his position as a member of the Church of England despite being an outspoken atheist. But he also had some other contradicting ideas. So he was very much an outspoken feminist and supported the suffragist movement. Henry Sidgwick, who was a moral philosophy professor in Cambridge, co-founded the Newnham College for Women in Cambridge in 1875 with Millicent Garrett Fawcett, and this inspired John McTaggart, Ellis McTaggart, to also have very feminist and suffragist allied views. His other professor, James Ward, was also a supporter of the suffragists and a feminist, and his wife, Mary Ward, was actually a professor of moral philosophy. So there's a lot of influence going into John McTaggart, Ellis McTaggart, along the lines of feminism and suffragist movements. And so both of John McTaggart, Ellis McTaggart's professors are supporting women's right to vote and women's right to education, and this inspires John to have a lean towards the suffragist movement. However, weirdly, when he was a college professor, he was teaching my favorite philosopher, Bertrand Russell. And Bertrand Russell was a very profound and outspoken pacifist. So during the First World War, there was this thing called consignment. So men had to sign up to go and be part of the war effort. And Bertrand Russell joined a non-consignment society. So a society saying, no, we are not going to sign up for war. We're not going to support the war effort. We think war is wrong. Bertrand Russell was a very outspoken pacifist, and his professor, who had been a very, very close friend of his, to the point of being part of the Mad Tea Party of Trinity with Bertrand Russell and G.E. Moore. And everyone said that John McTaggart, Ellis McTaggart, was the dormouse of like the Alice in Wonderland Mad Hatter Tea Party in that like trio. But he was also part of the Cambridge Apostles, which was like an intellectual society with Bertrand Russell. They were friends, as well as John being Bertrand Russell's professor. He was supposed to be supporting him, and yet he got him expelled from Cambridge for his pacifist views. Bertrand Russell gave pretty concrete reasons as to why he disagreed with consignment, and yet his professor literally got him kicked out of the college for it. I don't know whether they ever became friends again after that, probably not, but that's why McTaggart is not my favorite philosopher. He so could have been if he just supported Bertrand Russell's pacifist views, but he believed that supporting the war effort and consignment was part of the duty of all men in England, but specifically those who were at the upper echelons of academia and who had a bit more advantage than people who maybe didn't have so much advantage. So unfortunately, he got one of his best students kicked out of the college and one of his closest friends expelled, which is such a shame. But yeah, McTaggart, that's why you're not my favorite. So why do I have such an affinity for McTaggart? Well, I deeply believe in the unreality of time, and we can make a whole video about that because it was my favorite thing to study at university. I love the philosophy of time and I love the unreality of time. I truly adore the subject. But that wasn't the only thing that he was putting out there. So he was primarily a Hegelian philosopher. So he did loads of work and these massive tomes of work on Hegel. And he was doing these criticisms of Hegel's work and assessing Hegel's work and what he agreed with and what he didn't, what he found strong, what he found weak, and developing these ideas. And he himself was an idealist. So he saw the reality of the world being based in ideas, and his specific form of idealism is that reality is all just souls speaking to each other or perceiving each other. So he thinks that the substance of the universe, so literally everything, is these irreducible souls. So we're all separate souls, so we can't be sunk down into a monism. We're not all one thing, we're all separate souls, but everything is just souls perceiving each other. That's his principle. And he kind of had this form of the immortality of human souls. So we never die, we're just all reincarnating into another form of soul. And I can do a whole video on that. I love that idea. At the time, I was 18 when I first was reading his stuff, and I was like doing the stereotypical like Westerner young feminist thing of hippieing the hell out. So I was listening to like Ram Dass and Alan Watts every day and like exploring Buddhism. So when this dude was like, there is no external materialistic reality, we are all just souls, I was like eating it up. But then I got really into quantum mechanics as well. So then having quantum mechanics and sort of the non-reality of time that comes up in that very confusing simultaneity of quantum mechanics stuff matched with everything is just souls that don't have a temporal basis was the foundation of how I then proceeded to think really in the world. And so this is where a lot of my ideas come from. And it's important to also place where those ideas came from historically for him. So his professor, James Ward, was a moral philosophy professor, but he was inspired by the panpsychism coming out of Germany. So James Ward actually studied in Germany and was really intrigued by Leibniz. And Leibniz was an idealist, so he was also having this idea of that there's no material to the world, it's all ideas. And then James Ward developed that, and then McTaggart developed that further. And there is kind of a panpsychism element that runs through into McTaggart. Some people perceive it to be personalism, so everything is just personalities interacting with each other. I actually disagree with that because I think there's a distinction between the soul and the person, and McTaggart is only ever referring to souls. So I don't actually class McTaggart's work as personalism, but I can see why other people do, because for me, the soul is separate from the person, the personality. And I think that it's important to understand that when McTaggart's talking about reincarnation, he might not be talking about the carnate part of it, like as in meat, flesh, the meat sack. He's talking about kind of a repersonalization of the soul. And so for me, the person is not infinite, the soul is, and the person is just like a way of perceiving these irreducible souls. I could do a whole freaking video of that. If that seems confusing, I would so happily do a video on the soul versus personality and this kind of thing. But for now, my explanation of why I don't see McTaggart's work as personalism is because I think that the person and the soul are different. McTaggart only ever refers to everything being based on souls perceiving each other, not persons. And I think that the person is what he's referring to when he's saying that the soul is reincarnated into a new personality, but that is still an idea. It's not a carnate thing. It's not a material thing. So Leibniz, who is a pluralistic idealist, which means that he believes that the universe is made of psychic monads. A monad is like the most basic divine substance that everything else originates from. So he believes that like these indivisible monads, so these psychological elements, are the foundation of everything. And reality is just these irreducible psychologies and the many of them perceiving each other. Then this gets handed down to James Ward, who says our only intelligible notion of an object in itself is that it should be an object for itself. And this lands us in panpsychism and a belief that our physical perceptions are effects on us of psychical realities. So what he's saying there is that objects without any kind of inner life or self-experience, or kind of, if they're just like these innate things, don't make any sense to us. Intelligible objects have to have some inner world. And so James Ward is saying that materialistic objects with no inner world don't make no sense, can't understand them. So that's what he's saying, in that an object has to be an object for itself if it's going to be an object in itself, which is kind of old language, which comes down from Kant, like Immanuel Kant. But to give you an understanding of what that means is basically that objects have to have an inner world. They have to have some kind of self-consciousness in order for us to be able to understand them. And he thinks the world is made of psychical realities. So he's taking this Leibniz idea and he's handing it down to McTaggart, who then says everything is souls perceiving each other. So you can see where the context comes from. There's kind of this chain of ideas. And then McTaggart turns it into this eternal, reincarnating form that has no sense of time, which now seems quite relevant to the world of quantum mechanics. But I'm going to do a whole essay on that. I'm not going to try and squeeze that into a short video, but that's kind of where you get this handing down of ideas. So James Ward, one professor, and Henry Sidgwick, the other professor, kind of giving these German idealism ideas down to McTaggart, and also this feminism and suffragist movement idea as well. So you can see the context of his thinking. And then you can also see where his conservative war efforts might have come from, the man that he was named after, because the man he was named after was a Whig MP. So he kind of may have been getting these conservative ideas from there and supporting the war effort from there, like inheriting his ideas from other people, as everyone does. You know, that we're all just a combobulation and an amalgamation of the ideas that we get exposed to, and then we can kind of paint with those ideas. His mom ended up moving to New Zealand and lived in a place called New Plymouth in Taranaki in New Zealand. And when he went to visit her in 1899, he met the love of his life, who became his wife. His wife was Margaret Elizabeth Bird, and then McTaggart. And they actually had a really interesting academic relationship because she really vibed with philosophy. She was a smart cookie, and they shared some of the same ideas around the non-reality of time and souls being the psychical element behind everything. And when he died on his deathbed on the 18th of January, 1925, he turned to her and said, "I'm grieved that we must part, but you know I'm not afraid of death," which is pretty cool. Not being afraid of death is pretty groovy. But what I want you to do is comment down below whether you would like me to do an essay on the non-reality of time or the unreality of time, or on his Hegelian critique, or on what it means for everything to be just souls perceiving each other. Let me know what you'd like me to do, and then I will make a proper philosophy essay video about it. I'm very, very excited, but McTaggart is not my favorite philosopher. Bertrand Russell is, so I may do a video on Bertrand Russell as well, just because I love Bertrand Russell so much.